Imagine the sound. The clatter of a metal tray hitting the floor, the slop of lukewarm gruel splattering across concrete, and the roar of laughter from a crowd that isn't laughing for joy, but out of fear. This is the sound of humiliation. This is the daily symphony of the Blackwood Penitentiary cafeteria. And in the center of it all, standing over a slight, silent young woman, is a mountain of a man named Jax, a shirtless titan in a tattered blue and yellow varsity jacket, his chest a canvas of crude tattoos and brute pride. He'd just knocked the dinner from her hands, and now, as she knelt to clean the mess, he felt like a king. He had no idea he was standing on the edge of a volcano. If you're ready for a story about the quietest person in the room being the most dangerous, you're in the right place. Subscribe and join us, because what happens next will change the way you see strength forever. Her name was Lena. At 22, she was a ghost in the system, a new inmate with eyes that held the weight of centuries. She moved with a quiet grace that was utterly alien in this harsh, clanging environment. While other women postured and prowled, Lena seemed to fold into herself, making her smaller, less noticeable. She spoke only when necessary, her voice a soft murmur, and her most common expression was a placid, almost detached calm. To the predators of Blackwood, she was prey, fresh meat. Her first few days were a gauntlet of whispered threats, stolen glances, and testing shoves in the line. She absorbed it all without reaction, like a stone absorbing the rain. This, of course, was seen not as discipline, but as weakness, and weakness was a language Jax was fluent in. But Lena's silence was not emptiness. It was a library of unspoken lessons. It was the memory of a misty morning in a San Francisco dojo, a converted garage smelling of old wood and incense. Her sifu, an old man with hands like weathered leather and eyes that saw everything, would have her stand for hours in a simple horse stance, John Zhuang. The root, little blossom, is everything, he would say, his voice a calm river. A tree that wishes to touch the sky must first learn to stand unmoved against the storm. Your mind must be like the still water, reflecting everything, disturbed by nothing. He taught her that the first move in any conflict is not a block or a strike, but a breath, a conscious, deliberate inhalation that centers the spirit and roots the body to the earth. The shoves in the prison line, the hissed insults, they were just another storm. She breathed, she rooted, and she remained unmoved. Her calm was a fortress, and Jax, in his arrogance, was simply throwing himself against its walls. Jax was the undisputed ruler of the cafeteria, a former high school football star whose glory days ended with a felony assault charge. He carried his prison reputation like a replacement trophy. The blue and yellow jacket, stolen years ago, and now perpetually draped over his shoulders, was his crown. He was shirtless not just to display a physique honed by countless hours in the prison yard, but as a constant, primal display of dominance. His skin was a roadmap of violence. Knuckle tattoos, crude symbols of power, and the scars to prove he'd earned his place. His entertainment was simple: identify the weakest, and break them publicly. It cemented his power. It fed his ego. And in Lena, he saw the perfect victim. Her silence was an affront to his noise. Her humility was a challenge to his arrogance. He couldn't see that her humility wasn't a lack of pride, but a surplus of control. The confrontation began, as they always did, with a subtle shift in the cafeteria's atmosphere. The usual cacophony of clattering trays and raised voices dipped into a watchful hush as Jax and his two lieutenants, a wary woman named Shrike and a hulking brute called Moose, began their slow, predatory walk towards Lena's usual table in the corner. She was sitting alone, methodically eating a piece of dry bread, her gaze fixed on some distant point only she could see. Well, 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 Jax's voice boomed, cutting through the silence. Look what we have here. The new little mouse, nibbling on her cheese. Lena didn't look up. She took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the air fill her diaphragm, grounding her. She visualized her root, a tap drilling deep through the concrete floor into the bedrock below. He was just noise. She continued to chew. This infuriated him. Being ignored was a worse insult than being challenged. He slammed his palm down on her table, the impact echoing like a gunshot. The inmates around them flinched. Lena's eyes finally lifted, meeting his. There was no fear in them, no anger, just a deep, unsettling calm like the surface of a still lake. You got a hearing problem, mouse. Jax sneered, leaning in so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. When I talk to you, you look at me. You answer. That's how things work in my house. Lena slowly placed her bread back on her tray. "I have no quarrel with you," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost a whisper, yet it carried in the tense air. Jax laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Quarrel? Who says quarrel?" He looked back at his crew, who chuckled on cue. "I think she thinks she's in a library, not a prison." He reached down and picked up her plastic cup of water. "Let's see if we can wake you up a little." He poured the water slowly, deliberately, over her head. The cold liquid soaked her hair and dripped down her face, onto her orange jumpsuit. A collective intake of breath came from the watching inmates. This was a new level of humiliation. Lena closed her eyes. For a long moment, she just sat there, water streaming down her face. She didn't tremble. She didn't cry. She simply breathed. Inside, she was a tempest of memory, the feel of the cold, wet San Francisco fog on her face as she practiced her forms, her Sifu's voice cutting through the gloom. "They can pour water on your head, little blossom, but only you can let it drown your fire." When she opened her eyes again, the calm was still there, but it had hardened like ice over a deep ocean. The fire was now contained, focused, and ready to be directed. The next day it escalated. As Lena carried her tray from the serving line, Jax deliberately stepped into her path. "Oops," he said, a malicious grin spreading across his face as her tray tipped, sending the unappetizing glop of stew and a slice of meatloaf crashing to the floor. The cafeteria fell silent. This was the moment. This was where most broke down, cried, or begged. Lena looked down at the spilled food, then up at Jax. "You will clean that up," she said, her voice still low, but now it had an edge, a sliver of steel. Jax threw his head back and laughed. "I'll clean it up. You hear that, everyone? The mouse thinks she's the warden." He placed a heavy hand on her shoulder, his fingers digging in. "You're gonna get on your knees and lick that mess off the floor, and maybe then I'll think about letting you eat tomorrow." He pushed down, trying to force her to the ground. Lena's body didn't move. It was like trying to push down an ancient oak tree. A flicker of confusion crossed Jax's face. He pushed harder, putting his full weight into it. Her knees didn't even buckle. Her stance was rooted, immutable. The inmates watching began to murmur. This wasn't right. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Jax, enraged by her resistance and the growing unease of the crowd, decided to end the game. "Fine. Have it your way." He drew back his fist, a massive, calloused hammer that had broken bones and spirits alike. It was a punch thrown with full force, aimed directly at Lena's face. It was the kind of punch that promised unconsciousness, maybe worse. Time seemed to slow. For the inmates watching, it was a moment of horrific inevitability. But for Lena, it was simply a moment. Her body, which had been so still, exploded into motion. It wasn't a dodge, it was a blur. She moved her head a fraction of an inch, and Jax's fist whistled past her ear, the force of his own swing throwing him off balance. In the same fluid motion, her left hand came up, not in a fist, but with her fingers extended, striking like a serpent at the pressure point on the inside of his swinging arm. A jolt of paralyzing numbness shot through his limb. Before he could even register what had happened, Lena's right foot swept forward, hooking behind his ankle. It wasn't a powerful kick, but a precise, almost delicate redirection of his own momentum. Jax, the mighty Jax, crashed to the floor with a thunderous, shocking impact. The cafeteria was dead silent, save for the sound of Jax groaning in pain and confusion. He looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Lena stood over him, her posture now completely different. The hunched, submissive posture was gone. She stood tall, centered, her hands held in a relaxed yet ready stance. Her eyes, once calm, now burned with a focused, terrifying intensity. This was no scared girl. This was a master. This was a predator who had been masquerading as prey. Jax scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The humiliation was worse than the pain. He roared and charged her, a bull-seeing red. Lena didn't retreat. She flowed into his charge. As he lunged to grab her, she pivoted on one foot, her body twisting like a reed in the wind. She used his own forward momentum, grabbing his extended arm, turning her hips, and sending him flying over her shoulder. It was a perfect JG nage, a judo hip throw, executed with a grace and power that seemed impossible for her frame. Jax landed on his back on the hard concrete, the air blasted from his lungs in a loud whoosh. He lay there, gasping, stunned. But Lena wasn't finished. This wasn't just about defense anymore. This was a lesson. As Jax tried to rise, she was on him, Her movements were a breathtaking display of kung fu. It was Wing Chun, close quarters and devastatingly efficient. Her fists became a whirlwind, chain punches that rained down on his chest and shoulders not with brute force, but with shocking, penetrating power. Each strike landed with a sharp, percussive thud, targeting nerve clusters and muscle groups. It was like being stung to death by a swarm of bees. He tried to block, but her arms moved like water, flowing around his defenses, her movements economical and relentless. A sharp knuckle strike to his diaphragm stole his breath again. A precise, open-handed slap to his ear disoriented him. She was dismantling him piece by piece with a chilling, clinical precision. The entire prison cafeteria was on its feet, but no one made a sound. They were witnessing something beyond a fight. They were witnessing an annihilation. Shrike and Moose Jax's lieutenants stood frozen, their loyalty outweighed by sheer, primal terror. They saw the look in Lena's eyes, a focused, righteous fury that promised utter destruction to anyone who interfered. Finally, with Jax barely able to stand swaying on his feet, Lena delivered the final blow. It was a single, perfect front kick, Jung Ti Tui, that landed squarely in the center of his chest. It didn't just push him back, it lifted him off his feet. He crashed backward into a metal table, collapsing it with a deafening clang, and lay still amidst the wreckage, defeated, broken, and utterly humiliated. Lena stood panting, not from exertion, but from the release of long, suppressed emotion. She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the stunned inmates. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. She then walked over to the spilled tray of food, picked up a clean napkin, and knelt. She wasn't kneeling in submission this time. She was kneeling to clean up the mess she had been forced to make. As she wiped the stew from the floor, the spell was broken. A slow, hesitant clap started from a table in the back, then another, and then the entire cafeteria erupted in applause, not for violence, but for justice, for the fall of a tyrant, for the rise of a quiet, unexpected hero. The change was not just in the atmosphere, but in the very architecture of power within those concrete walls. Jax, once a roaring lion, became a hollow-eyed ghost, transferred to the infirmary with 2 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a spirit that seemed irrevocably broken. The blue and yellow jacket, that symbol of his fabricated pride, was found discarded in a trash bin, soiled and forgotten, while his lieutenants, Shrike and Moose, fragmented without his central force, their influence evaporating overnight. In the vacuum he left, no single tyrant rose. Instead, a fragile, unspoken code emerged, one born from the memory of a quiet woman who had chosen, for one explosive moment, to stop being quiet. Women who had once scurried with their heads down now walked with a straighter spine. Arguments that might have escalated into violence were now cooled with a wary glance, a silent reminder of the cost of unchecked aggression. But the most profound transformation was in Lena herself. In the days that followed, she was left in a solitary confinement that was less a punishment and more a sanctuary, a sterile white room where the echoes of combat finally faded, allowing the memory of her Sifu's final, gentle lesson to surface. We learn the art not to fight, little blossom, but to carry a great sorrow, the sorrow of knowing how to harm, and choosing every day to build instead. When she emerged, the prison culture had seismically shifted, and she found small, unexpected tokens on her bunk, an extra piece of fruit, a handwritten note that simply said, "Thank you," a new toothbrush, a quiet economy of gratitude from those who had suffered under Jax's reign. She did not become the new bully. She became the system's immune response, a one-woman antibody that cured the body politic of a virulent disease. And the prison, while still a place of steel and regret, now operated with a new, tense, watchful peace, a peace bought and paid for with the shocking, elegant fury of a kung fu master who had finally found a reason to no longer turn the other cheek. Later, in the warden's office, Lena sat silently as the head guard recounted the events. Multiple witnesses confirmed Jax was the aggressor. The guard said, "Self-defense, clear as day." The warden, a stern but fair woman, looked at Lena. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked. Lena was silent for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "My Sifo, my master, he taught me from when I was a little girl. He said the highest form of kung fu is to avoid the fight. But when a predator strikes, you do not warn it. You remove its fangs." She was placed in solitary confinement for a week, not as punishment, but for her own protection from any lingering loyalists to Jax. When she emerged, the culture of Blackwood had shifted. The bullying had lessened, a new, unspoken respect filled the air. Lena had not sought power, but she had achieved it through undeniable strength. She had traded her silence not for violence, but for peace, proving that true power isn't about the noise you make, but the storm you can quietly contain. Her story became a legend, a whispered reminder that you should never, ever mistake silence for weakness. So from the ashes of humiliation, a quiet woman forged a new order with her bare hands and a will of iron. It makes you wonder about the hidden strengths in the people around you every single day. And it makes me wonder about you, the person watching this right now. From which part of the country are you watching this video? Let me know in the comments.